Better rock, better talk. Damn radio.
Hello, good evening, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are on Damn Radio, and I'm very glad to have you. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about again. There's plenty to go around for us to chat about. And I'm not even sure where I'm going to begin. If you feel like calling in and you'd like to, 573-746-8020. I spent quite a bit last night going into Trump's tariff stuff. Has changed from the 50-day down to the 10 to 12-day. Okay. Haven't seen a whole lot of news on that. Saw some mockery of a little bit of it on the Russian side. What we're going to do today is I wanted to play a little bit, just because if you haven't heard Jai Shankar, you probably should hear him. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. I'm going to go into a bunch of different news from the other side of the world that is a little bit on the frightening side, post-Trump drama. Gotta have the Trump drama. You gotta have that. And I wonder if, excuse me, I'm having a hard time taking some of this serious. I did want to get to one of wherever this one is. It is the largest ship in the Russian fleet has gone back in the water. But before we get to that, because we're going to tell you a little bit about that entire scenario, two nuclear reactors on this ship. It's a great big one. But before that, there's a rather comical article about RT, Russia Today. And I provide to you, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 stories a day from RT in some form or another, where I take some of the content from there. I like watching India Now. There's I forget her name, but there's a couple of very interesting people over there that I like to listen to while waiting for news about BRICS or Jai Shankar or Modi over there. And I like to get stuff that you don't get in the US. Okay. And funny story out today from RT. Here it is. US Intel chief has said that more Americans watch RT, Russia Today, than CNN. More Americans. And I don't know the truth of that. I've never heard that before, but it's a comical article because RT has a larger American audience than CNN, says former U.S. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. Clapper was a key figure in Russiagate conspiracies, which included claims that RT helped influence the election of Trump over Clinton in 2016. Well, do you know what? The issue is probably bigger than that. It's pretty damn sad that you got to go out of the country to get something that isn't so clearly BS that, and you can't get good news from anywhere in America that is mainstream, what do they call them? Legacy media outlets. That is horrifying to me, that we are forced to do this, because what other choice do you have? You could get all of your, propaganda wars, I suppose, and those would be definitely newsworthy, I suppose, to get your propaganda wars from Fox News. I still like watching every once in a while. Who's the lady at night? Laura Ingraham. I like watching her. I think she's pretty reasonable. I don't like the fact that she brings on a lot of warmongers to interview. Sean Hannity, I can't. I just can't bear it anymore. He's so completely pro any war too. You know, you could throw him with the Lindsey Grahams of the world. Is the way I feel. You know, maybe that's not fair to him, but I tell you what, that's how I feel when I watch him because he likes to justify any war as well. But continuing, Clapper, of course, was a big dude in the Russiagate conspiracy. Earlier this month, Tulsi Gabbard declassified a whole bunch of Obama era documents that say, show the efforts by the president and his senior officials to distort intelligence on unsubstantiated claims that Moscow interfered in the 2016 election. Well, here's the terror of it all. This is where they're forcing us from watching our own news. Our news was so in the pocket of the White House and the Democratic Party that sure enough you were getting better news from RT. If you want to call watching a news source or reading your news source from somewhere else that has a different perspective and that influenced the election, maybe you could change your argument to say, instead of Russian disinformation, Russian information, contrary to what the Democratic Party wanted to put out, allowed people to get a more focused and reasonable point of view. Maybe you could look at that. But in an interview with CNN aired last week, Clapper said even more. Excuse me, I didn't sleep well last night. He doubled down on the conspiracy theory and accused Russia through RT of unleashing a very sophisticated, extensive, and aggressive information operation campaign to influence public opinion in the U.S. Now, isn't that what a news media outlet is supposed to do? Isn't that what CNN does every day? Isn't that what Fox News and NBC, CBS, any of those other guys, isn't that what they do every single day? That they're out trying to talk about extensive and aggressive, because you ever see a journalist ask a softball question to anybody other than Joe Biden? Where they pansy it out of the biz. That is what they do. That's what media is it not? When I tell you the Sam stories that I tell you, am I not telling you more or less my point of view? There are things that I don't completely agree with, but why wouldn't you think that since you're listening to me, that I have some kind of a different point of view, that my point of view goes a different way? Well, so does CNN's, so does RT, and all of that. He said that RT has a bigger following in this country. He said this on CNN, by the way. Has a bigger following in this country than this network, CNN, does, while accusing it of using what he described as fake news implants. Right? Clapper claimed that the alleged Russian campaign was aimed at sowing doubt, discord, and distrust among the American public. Well, what was CNN doing? Okay, if RT's doing that, well, okay. It's called Russia Today. You would think that people who are listening to it or reading content from it would know that it's going to be in the realm of good opinion for Russia, don't you think? Or are we thinking that it's something else? It's U.S. It's like watching news from South Africa and thinking they're going to give you, horror story news about South Africa and good news about the rest of the world. Hopefully people are focusing on the news and telling events and perhaps perspectives, but not slanting it so far that it's just completely nonsensical. Uh, RT, of course, has faced increased censorship and legal hurdles in the U.S. forever, probably since 2014, although they got really pushy in 2017. And I told you about last year them starting to put conspiracy theory. If you can claim they have an intent to impact an election, you can use some obscure section of it. And if you can say it's more than one person, you can throw Margarita Simonyan on there, and you can claim that she's part of a conspiracy to do this. And if they're paying for it, and then somebody has purchased something with that money, they took all their money. They seized their houses, they seized their bank accounts that are located in the US, and then go, well, that's because it's a conspiracy. They're conspiring to influence the US electorate. Yeah, okay. So is CNN. That's the point. Crazy stuff. Um, let's see. The Department of Justice requires RT America to register as a foreign agent. RT America channel was then denied congressional press credentials, and then it was forced to close down in 2022 after Russia entered into the Ukraine conflict, and well, full scale, because they already been in that since the 14. And then RT content was later restricted and deleted from major platforms, hard to find, including on YouTube. You still can get it. It had some 5 billion views and several million subscribers. Facebook kicked them off. Last year, the U.S. indicted 2 Russians identified as RT employees with violating the Foreign Agent Registration Act, laundering money, and furnishing millions of dollars to U.S.-based entities to covertly influence U.S. audiences. Why covertly? Why can't you just do it? What difference does it make if you're registered? No. That's where they seized all their money. Those are the ones I was talking about. Here it is. Separately, the U.S. sanctioned editor-in-chief of RT, Margarita Simonyan, and other RT employees over efforts to influence U.S. elections. Moscow, of course, denounces this crackdown, called it a testament to the degradation of democracy and its transformation into totalitarian, neoliberal dictatorship. Not inaccurate. Not inaccurate. And so I don't know. I think I'm over here, smiling about it because it's just so foolish. And it's oh, damn it. I closed a couple of tabs I didn't want to close, and now I won't be able to go back and find them. There's I'm trying to get to the right one. Okay, here it is. The U.S. More on the media. I wanted to tell you. Anybody watches Greg Gutfeld? Yeah, I like watching him sometimes. I find him somewhat comical, and so I do like to watch him. And he's pretty intelligent. At first, I thought he was just a loudmouth, but after a couple of years of watching, what he was doing, I kind of fell into it and liked it more and more of what he was saying. And he is fairly creative with how he puts out his content. But he said the U.S. media needs to make serious amends to many people including President Putin, for its role that they claim in spreading Russiagate and Russian disinformation. The political commentator, comedian, and author responded to recent revelations made by Tulsi Gabbard, releasing all these documents as overwhelming evidence coordinated by senior Obama era officials. We cannot let this go, he said. They need to make serious amends because we're still living with the aftermath, he said. People have lost jobs, careers, friends, and there needs to be consequences. For that, I would say, well, Greg, there are never any consequences for people in power. It's not going to happen. And it doesn't happen in any bar association to personalize just a tiny bit there. It never happens. Nobody's going to apologize. Nobody's going to do anything. And on the other hand, nobody's going to be indicted. That ain't going to happen. Good luck with that. Excuse me. He says media outlets in America played the starring role in amplifying the subversive plot against the President of the United States, at that time, Donald Trump. He dismissed claims by the media accusing the Trump administration of trying to rewrite history and called them an attempt to shift culpability from themselves and hide the lies they perpetuated for a decade. Well, most of us, when we were watching it, knew it was just crap anyway, or at least it wasn't Russian-based crap, And it's always go watch any movie. Who's the bad guy? It's a Russian. Go find somebody who's less than intelligent in a major movie, and that person will have a Russian accent. They take great joy in beating up on Russia all the time and anything they have to say. There was a couple of articles that I don't think I have time to add in here today, but for example, since Russians have been kicked out of international competitions regarding sports, especially in skating, figure skating, dance competitions, those sorts of things, attendance has dropped dramatically and revenues have dropped dramatically. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is telling us the following. He says Ukrainian refugees will be allowed to remain in the U.S. until the conflict between Moscow and Kiev ends, said Trump. 240,000 Ukrainians have entered the U.S. since escalation in 2022. Many under the program called U4U, Uniting for Ukraine is what that means. And it's a program introduced by Joe Biden, but after taking office in January, Trump said that DHS had to terminate all categorical parole programs, including U4U, raising concerns that protections for Ukrainians would be revoked. In April, thousands of Ukrainians received emails stating they had to leave the U.S. within 7 days. Speaking to reporters, Trump was asked by a Deutsche Welle reporter whether Ukrainians would be allowed to stay in the U.S. until the end, and he said, "I think we will. Yes, I will." He said, noting that we have a lot of people that came in from Ukraine, and we're working with them. I think he just makes it up as he goes along. He just, at least you're getting a real reaction from him. He just makes it up as he goes along. I doubt he knows anything about the U4U program or how it works. They were quizzing him about getting rid of these. And in keeping with that, last night I spent quite a bit of time going over the consequences of this. These sanctions that he wants to put in place within the next 10 days. And what he's doing, well, it seems like he might have started early because India is now responding to Trump's 25% tariff. So Trump announced a 25% tariff on India, and New Delhi said it would take all the steps necessary to secure the interests of its domestic players. India and the US have been engaged in negotiations on concluding a fair, balanced, and beneficial bilateral trade agreement over the last few months. We remain committed to that objective. New Delhi cited the recently concluded deal on free trade with the UK, saying that its approach to similar pacts with other nations, including the US, will remain the same, and it'll take into account the concerns and interests of its own farmers, entrepreneurs, and small businesses. But Trump says, while India is our friend, we have over the years done little business with them because their tariffs are far too high, he said, saying that New Delhi has bought a vast majority of their military equipment from Russia and is Russia's largest buyer of energy. I think he's mistaken there. I think China is, but India is not far behind. We talked a little bit about that last night. He put a 26% tariff on goods from India in March, and then he delayed it until August 1. And according to Indian media, they've been talking about it. And he said an interim deal has been reached. So they said they're going to, Jai Shankar, who I wanted to play for you, you know what? I'm not going to, though. I wanted to get to this other topic today, but we're still fighting on that end. And he still has, remember, another 100% tariff if they continue to do business with Russia. So I'm very interested in seeing how this plays out. He did something similar in the news today with, where is that? The headline says Trump punishing India over Russia trade. He's announced that they'll get another 25% tariff on Friday after continuing to trade with Russia. In a post on Truth Social, he said, India is our friend, but we do relatively little business with them. All things not good. India will be paying a tariff of 25%, plus a penalty. Plus, he just makes it up off the top of his head as he goes along. And he just earlier this week he changed his deadline for Ukraine. We know all that stuff, and he wants to punish them. Let's see, where did my Brazil item go? And China. We want to get to that. Damnation, it's gone. I said I deleted a couple. China will resist American sanctions as a result of buying Russian oil. And that's from Scott Bessent said that. So he knows. Everybody knows. They don't care. And China doesn't care. Russia doesn't care. And they'd prefer not to, but they're not going to be. I take all these things similar to the if you're doing something with a gun to your head, are you really doing it? So somebody comes up and points a gun at you and says, go rob the bank. Go rob the bank, or, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to shoot your wife. Does that mean you've made the choice to go do something? Are you supposed to say no when in normal life you wouldn't rob a bank or do something dastardly, but if somebody's holding a gun to your head, you have to? Well, at least Besson gets this. People are tired of having a gun put to their head. That's the issue. And the money is not the issue. Trump thinks it's all about the money. I don't think so. So let's do another story. How far do I want to go on that one? This one's a pretty short one. But Russian officials have criticized Trump's threats as to China and itself, claiming that it undermines efforts to achieve the peace in Ukraine. Bessent said proposed legislation before Congress that would authorize Trump to impose tariffs on buyers of sanctioned Russian oil would prompt U.S. allies to adopt similar measures. I think anyone who buys Russian oil should be ready for this. But China has made it clear during talks with him in Beijing that energy matter is a matter of national sovereignty, and they will continue buying Russian oil based on internal policy priorities. The Chinese take their sovereignty very seriously. So does everyone else, by the way. Geez, you're a genius, Mr. Besant, aren't you? We don't want to impede on their sovereignty, so they'd like to pay a 100% tariff instead, Besant said. China remains the largest buyer of Russian oil, imports over 2 million barrels per day, 20% of its total crude, followed by India and Turkey. Western sanctions were imposed 3 years ago, and since 2022, China and India have sharply increased their Russian oil purchases because they can get it straight from a pipeline that they completed around that time. In May, India was the second largest buyer of Russian fossil fuels, imports at 4.9 billion, 72% of which was crude. So I'm watching this with a good deal of interest. The White House is ready for sanctions blowback. They say. The State Department said today that it presumes the White House is keeping an eye on it. I presume, as we should, that all the impact would be considered. The president is not someone who's making a decision on the fly. I disagree with that, Miss Bruce, who said that. I totally disagree. I think he's making it up as he goes along. This has clearly been a consideration from the beginning, putting in sanctions, right? But most people are dismissing the sanctions, even me. I spent too much time on that topic yesterday. But remember, here's a report from an analyst to wrap this kind of up for you on what these sanctions and tariffs are going to do. BRICS is offering a global alternative to Western monopoly, right? A group of leading experts believe that the rise of the global South will alter and is altering the world's power dynamics. BRICS is emerging as a strategic alternative to unraveling a Western-led global order. There was a third annual Russian-African conference held in South Africa on Monday. Foreign policy analyst Sanusha Naidu described BRICS as part of a growing ecosystem that countries are turning to amid uncertainty in the world. When you enter into a very kind of unpredictable global architecture, countries look to see how they can hedge their bets and find something a little more or a little less volatile would probably be a better way to put it. The way the international system was compiled and the way the BRICS is provided is changing the ecosystem and giving people something to think about. Fyodor Lukyanov, who's a research director at the Valdai Discussion Club, noted that the rise of the global South is altering world power dynamics no matter what the West prefers. The fact that more countries joined BRICS as member partner states, and all those countries are from the global South, shows that the new environment emerges in the world. The environment is not anti-Western, but it gives them alternatives to the Western monopolies. BRICS was established in 2006, blah, blah, blah. We all know all that stuff, about BRICS. I talk about it here a lot. So, again, to wrap that up, tariffs in all of these things really aren't going to help you all that much, you know. I wanted to get into. I listened to a, geez, 2 hours, 2 hours and a half of the Russian Foreign Ministry office today, and it's. I try to do that at least once a week, and Wednesday is a good day to do it. And Maria Zakharova was commemorated the Day of Remembrance for Donbass victims today, condemned Ukraine's military actions, and she always calls the Kiev regime neo-Nazis. She gave a detailed chronology of drone and missile attacks against civilian targets, women and children, and she calls it terrorism supported by the West through the supply of weapons and these U.S. and Germany Taurus missile systems. She talked about the Ukraine's extending military mobilization until November 5. New information came out about that now they're going to keep on mobilizing till November 5. And desertion and casualty rates from Ukraine are just incredible. She claims, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russia, that Ukraine lost 8,650 soldiers last week alone. She said the military in Ukraine is collapsing. They're plagued by looting, poor command, and very high losses. And the demands of Zelensky, he's out there begging for more money, but not for the Ukrainian people, but to fund war production. That's it. He called last week their soldiers weapons that protect everyone, and she said that, but they don't get any of the money. they don't get any investment in them really. The cultural heritage of UNESCO is being destroyed. She talked about that a little bit, and said that in DPR, LPR, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, she said that Ukrainian forces are behind the attacks on these cultural sites and religious institutions, some of which are UNESCO sites. They talked about nuclear and environmental accusations against. She said that Ukrainian Ambassador Garvish's warning about the Lomonosov nuclear power plant are hypocritical, especially when Ukraine was attacking the Zaporizhia nuclear facility, which they've been trying to do forever, and that one has the IAEA in there. She also condemned Moldova. I found this interesting because Moldova is a pretty little country, and I like being there. And that was a nice country. And Moldova is limiting voting access for voting in Russian, while expanding stations in the West, but not for Russian speakers. She accused Moldovan authorities of repressing the Russian cultural organizations and promoting Russophobia ahead of elections. She criticized Austria. She criticized, the foreign minister of Austria for discussing NATO membership, and called it a betrayal of Austria's eternal neutrality established in 1955. She interpreted this shift as another sign of Europe ceding its own sovereignty to NATO. And boy, she talked for a very long time, about what is going on in Iran. She said that the West has no right to use UN snapback sanctions. Where did they get the legal standing? And so that's an interesting topic to get into. What have we done over there in Iran? Is it going to be something that is going to continue. Will we get the IAEA reports and people and all of that? I don't know. She gave a very interesting conversation today, or discussion, that she was talking about there's a lot of news on Ukrainian mobilization efforts, like a Ukrainian man resorting to cross-dressing, trying to get out of the country. There's a funny video that came out. Males between the age of 18 and 60 have been told they can't leave without, governmental permission under mobilization laws, and they're checking these people out sitting on the bus. Ukrainian man disguised as a woman is caught in attempt to flee the country. 30-year-old suspect was detained at a Ukrainian checkpoint while traveling by bus from the Black seaport of Odessa to Reni, a city located near the border with Romania. According to a statement, the Border Guard Service on Saturday, the man was wearing a black satin dress, a wig, and sunglasses in his effort to pose as a female, and he was charged with attempting to illegally cross the border. It's a pretty comical video, actually. Kiev has struggled with widespread draft evasion, widespread desertion. They're well over 125,000 desertions in the military since it began. It's this is not good, and they're losing them all. Now, in keeping with that, I did you know what? One more quick topic before I get to that, because they had a allegedly secret meeting to get rid of Zelensky, right? And if you haven't heard about this is an interesting development. We all kind of anticipated it anyway. U.S. and U.K. officials met secretly with key Ukrainian power brokers to discuss getting rid of Zelensky and replacing him with Zaluzhny Valery, who lives in London, has been the London ambassador since he was fired from being the commander-in-chief or commanding general of the military. So, in a statement on Thursday, SVR claimed that Western officials had gathered in an undisclosed alpine resort with Andrei Yermak, who's a Ukrainian military intelligence. Zelensky aide, with Ukrainian military intelligence chief Kirill Bogdanov, and Zaluzhny himself, who's Kiev's ambassador to the UK. According to the agency, all sides agreed it is time for Zelensky to be replaced, and called the change a key condition for resetting Kiev's relations with the West and continuing military aid. Well, when I first heard this, which was late last night, after my show, when I first heard it, it was, I thought that, and I've thought he needs to go for a while anyway. And it would be a good time to reset. And you know what they could actually do? They could actually say, they could lay some blame on him and say it's over. The war is over. And they could claim it was his fault, because when big change comes, you make big changes all the way around. And you don't have to say it was his fault. You just let it go. And that would be a good way to end the conflict. Now, Zaluzhny is no pro-Russian, of course. And there's also reports that say that that's how they keep the money train rolling into Ukraine. They get rid of Zelensky. I think Trump might be somewhere behind this. A lot of people have said they wanted Zaluzhny to become president for a long time. Zaluzhny served as commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces from 21 to 24, had high approval ratings, with speculation that he would beat Zelensky in a potential presidential election. That's why Zelensky appointed him as ambassador and got him out of the country. SVR claimed the covert meeting reveals why Zelensky initially backed a bill to strip two anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine of their independence that we talked about the other day. According to SVR, Yermak set up Zelensky by advising him to push this change, knowing it would undermine his image abroad and would provide justification for Western partners to remove him. Always got to be a game player, huh? Got to have games going on. The SVR went on to address ordinary Ukrainians, saying, "A new president of your country has been chosen at an alpine resort. Is this the triumph of Ukrainian democracy and the independence you dreamed of?" Zelensky's presidential term expired last May, but he won't, we all know that. Russia claims he's illegitimate, so there ought to be something. I don't expect him to be there for long. I truly don't expect him from the 10 days. Well, I wanted to get into, and I did quite a report that I probably could do a whole show on, that I find quite intriguing. Many people have, especially former military folks, have gone to Ukraine from America, to Russia from America, joined the military on either side, far more on Ukraine than anywhere else, than on Russia's side. But there's a good number in Russia as well. And I wanted to tell a few of their stories from an American, perspective. Is this patriotism? I've kind of been talking about patriotism for the last week or two, trying to people like Mark Twain, people like Zhirinovsky, people like Vysotsky, Thomas Paine, many other people we talked about, that people are patriots. Well, is it patriotic to leave your own country and go join someone else's army, pick a side in someone else's army, especially if you're mistaken? And I suppose for me, my trouble with all of this, I suppose, people feel the urge to pick a side, and people have done it. And I don't know, this soldier of fortune stuff and going and being a mercenary for somebody, killing people that you have no business killing. I think that in general, I'm against it. I am not so sure that I could support going to another country while it's at war and joining as a consultant, as a advisor, something like that. That I could see doing. I could see that. These mercenaries, for lack of a better word, run into some problems at home when they do this. So let's talk about some Western volunteers in the Russia-Ukraine war on both sides, okay? Western countries had volunteers that traveled to Ukraine across, ever since the Russian invasion from 2014, and after 2022, quite a few more. There were quite a few from North America, Western Europe, and Australia that enlisted in Ukraine forces or local militias. Ukraine's government claimed that an entire international legion of about 20,000 volunteers from 50 countries showed up in 2022. But independent verification of those numbers are difficult. I've never seen any concrete evidence or journalistic report that can talk about 20,000 as a sort of international legion unit. But there have been a good number of private citizens, military veterans that on their own initiative go into Ukraine or some into Russia. Western governments allegedly have not officially deployed combat troops. If you remember a story I did last year, or early this year, might have been in January, February, there was a documents found that showed the crew of who was in this vehicle. So let's talk about some notable volunteers for Ukraine. A guy named Jordan Gatley, who was from the UK. He was a 24-year-old British Army soldier who left the military in March of 2022 and went to fight in Ukraine. He was killed by sniper fire in a battle for Severodonetsk in June of 2022. The UK Foreign Office confirmed his death, and Ukrainian officials said he was a hero for volunteering to defend Ukraine. There's a guy named Jean-Francois Hrolf Rattel from Canada, a Canadian Armed Forces veteran who commanded the Norman Brigade, a volunteer unit of foreign fighters in Ukraine. He too was killed in action in 2023. Canada's government does not track its volunteers, but media has said at least 9 Canadian fighters were killed as of 2023. In one May 2023 battle, 2 Canadian volunteers, both former soldiers, died fighting in Bakhmut. U.S. volunteers, at least 15 American citizens, have died fighting for Ukraine as of 2023. Guy named Stephen Zabielski, age 52, was killed by a landmine in May 2022, one of the first confirmed American combat deaths. Many volunteers from the U.S. are military veterans who felt compelled to help Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense has claimed a far higher number of American losses. They say 491 Americans have been killed, and they know of 1,113 who went to Ukraine to fight. But this figure is not a verified number. Well, except by Russia, if you want to believe their numbers. Volunteers from across Europe and beyond have served Ukraine as well. By one tally, 18 French volunteer fighters have been killed, several from Britain, several Georgians, quite a few Australians, Polish people, and others. A guy named Scott Sibley in Ukraine and a guy named Brian Young from the USA were among fighters killed in the early days of 2022. Australia saw at least 2 veterans killed in 2022. New Zealand Special Forces, who went AWOL to fight in Ukraine, was killed in action that year. That prompted the New Zealand authorities to warn against such unauthorized service. Each fallen volunteer is, praised by Ukrainian officials for their sacrifice in defending Ukraine. For me, I really would feel better if I felt that these people had a good idea what they were fighting for. If they didn't die for nothing. If it was worth it to them or their families, and I realize it's looking back, and backseat driving or whatever you want to call it, to judge what they're. And I try not to judge people, but I feel bad for them. I feel bad for their families. I think they're doing it for the wrong reasons. And Russia was not an enemy of any of these countries that we're talking about. Russia's not an enemy of France, England, America, any of these. There's a lot of backlash and legal issues when volunteers home countries, a lot of it is mixed, but a good amount of it is negative. Most Western governments are discouraging citizens from traveling to go join the war. They say it's dangerous, and they cite a lot of diplomatic concerns. Britain's army warned active duty soldiers not to leave and go to Ukraine. In March 2022, a few British servicemen face court-martial for trying to join the fight in Ukraine. A 19-year-old guardsman was caught after he went to Ukraine and when returned to his unit. But for civilian volunteers, most Western states, it's not criminalized, and they don't turn it into a crime for going and fighting for Ukraine, which they see as helping an ally. But sometimes some people are calling them heroes because somebody has decided that Russia is the enemy. So I'm going to get to the people that are fighting on the side of Russia, but I wanted to talk about this because it's just so nonsensical in the first place. Public sentiment, if you're fighting on the side of Ukraine, it's changing now, but in the beginning, it was very much likely to be lionized, turn you into a hero. Western officials stressed that these fighters that are private citizens, they act in their own private capacity, and they strongly urge them not to go. But unlike those who join extremist groups like ISIS, volunteers in Ukraine have generally not faced any prosecution upon return. One exception was Spain. In 2015, Spain arrested 8 Spaniards who fought for the pro-Russian separatists on charges of undermining Spain's neutrality. But Spaniards and other people fighting for Ukraine, they didn't punish. Nobody ever said this. Spain has not listed Russia as an enemy. They haven't. A number of Western volunteers were a good number were captured by Russian forces, which led to some pretty hairy situations. In 2022, in April, remember the British fighter named Aidan Aslan and another guy named Sean Pinner, and they were captured during the siege of Mariupol. A Russian proxy court in Donetsk sentenced them to death as mercenaries, a move the UK condemned as a sham judgment which violated the Geneva Convention. The men were serving in Ukraine's regular military and were therefore entitled to POW status, not treatment as mercenaries. But Russia said they were going to do this if you go over and you fight for them and you don't hold a Ukrainian passport, you're not technically covered under the Geneva Convention. That's what they say. And I haven't read it enough to tell you. I thought it would come out in my research here, but apparently didn't go too far. Aslan and Pinner spent months in captivity. They were shown in those trials, where in Russia you're not chained to a bench or anything, but they put you in a little like a witness a witness podium that you would see in a courtroom. But the difference is this one is surrounded by it looks like a cage, but inside it's a continuation of bench and stuff. So they like to show them in cage. So before they were released, both of these two were released. They were released in September 22 in a prisoner exchange, along with 3 Britons and 2 other Americans, right? 2 guys, Americans, named Alex Drucke and Andy Tai Nwakun, he's a U.S. military veterans, both from Alabama, were captured by Russian forces in June of 2022 while fighting in eastern Ukraine. They were 3 months in captivity, And in September, they were released in the same Saudi brokered deal that freed the two that I was talking about a minute ago. They were in decent shape and pretty good spirits. Their families expressed relief and reiterated warnings that Americans who volunteer in Ukraine do face significant risk, and that the U.S. government, of course, cannot guarantee their safety if they are captured. So Western volunteers operate at their own peril. I mean, those captured by Russia, could be treated criminally, right? So there's probably thousands of Westerners who fought on Ukraine's side, and their home country responses, disbelief, I suppose, disinterest, geez, what are these guys, like Lindsey Graham never fought a fight or never saw a fight they couldn't love, and you gotta, you just believe all the hype and think that Russia's the bad guys, right? Let's talk about a few supporting on the Russian side. They're far fewer in numbers, but there's been quite a few that have gone to fight on the Russian side. They go with usually pro-Russian separatists in the Donbass region, or some of them have joined the Russian military itself. And this happened ever since 2014 and well after 2022. They come from, all over the place. And Westerners fighting for Russia, probably talk like I talk. They're anti-imperialist, who see the conflict in Donbass as anti-Russian, and with what they're doing, anti-Ukrainian Russian, right? That's the way I look at it. But I've studied this for a very long time. And so if I went over and joined the military in Russia, people probably wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't do it. I might advise or something, well away from any. I wouldn't go die for Russia any more than I'd go die for Ukraine. I think they're all nuts. What are you fighting for? What are you defending? What are you? You sure as hell aren't defending democracy. That's if you're in Ukraine defending democracy, you're in the wrong spot. Democracy doesn't exist there. Okay. There's a French group that was called Continental Unity, and they recruited French and other Europeans into Donbass, and some Americans went to fight on the Russian side in Ukraine. The 8 Spaniards I was telling you about fought in there. Notable Westerners on the Russian side. Okay, there's a handful of cases. Russell Texas Bentley of the U.S. was probably the most infamous American to join the Russian army. He was lived in Texas, moved to Donbass in 2014. In his 50s, he joined the Vostok Battalion, and was his name on the radio was the Donbass Cowboy. And he was on Russian television and denounced the U.S. He even obtained Russian citizenship in 2021. In a grim turn of events, he was found dead in 2024. He was allegedly not killed by Ukrainians, but was killed by Russian soldiers. Russian authorities charged 4 of their servicemen with abducting and killing him, and saying that they may have been mistaken or gotten into a dispute of some sort. He was 64 when he died, and it just didn't end well in here. A terrible story. Michael Alexander Gloss from the USA, a 21-year-old American. He's the son of a high-ranking CIA official in Virginia. And according to an independent investigation, he was pro-Russian, traveled to Russia, signed a contract to join the Russian army in 2023. He was deployed with a Russian assault unit near Soledar and was killed on April 4th, 2024. An obituary by his family confirmed his death in eastern Ukraine. They claim, not they claim, but a lot of people claim that he was a traitor, right? 1,500 foreign citizens who enlisted in the Russian military and talking they use him as an example to say why RT and other places should be blocked in the U.S. Another guy named Derek Deke Huffman, an American father of three, also from Texas, moved his family to Russia in 2025. He was seeking traditional values. Huffman, a 39-year-old with zero military experience, was drawn by pro-Putin American bloggers project to create an American village in Russia. Did you see that? I've talked about that. In May 2025, he volunteered for the Russian army under the promise of a non-combat job, allegedly. Instead, within weeks, he was issued a rifle and sent to the front line. His wife went on social media to protest that the case he had been tricked going to fight. Now, I've watched a bunch of her YouTube videos. I went and checked them out. That's not what she says. She says he's safe and they're doing okay. When you read, most of the stories that you get are going to be twisted, when we get them on the Western side. But remember those far left Spanish volunteers that went to fight on the Russian side? You can't find any good words about any of these people in any Western media. And I was actually seeking to get some of their whether YouTube, whether Facebook, whether whatever channel that they're talking about, to find out where they are located or how to contact them. I thought that would be an interesting development if I could actually talk to some of these guys. I'd like to get the information from them directly. Like I always say, I try to, that I want to do. Most of these have come from news sources. Let's see. It is worth noting that very few Western fighters for Russia have been captured by Ukraine. Ukrainian forces in 2022 reportedly captured a Brazilian national fighting for the Wagner group and one French-born fighter in Kharkiv, although they didn't release their identities. Unlike Russia's treatment of POWs, according to this story anyway, Ukraine doesn't show these captives very much. They just handle them through the embassies, American or British fighters for Russia captured. I wanted to dig in as well to find out if there were any a popular topic on Telegram, in Russian media, even some in the US, is that there are claims that there really are, and there certainly were. Do you remember when they were hidden underground in some huge factory, that way back when there were allegedly an entire factory full of Western advisors, generals, the people that were running the war for a period of time. So I wanted to get into and dig into, but it's hard to come across. In a related issue on direct involvement of American military personnel involved in the war that are still, and the point is, they are still enlisted or a member of the U.S. or other Western military, and that they are fighting over there. Remember, I have seen some of these, whether it's on Telegram, TikTok, whatever, that shows these sheets when they blow up a BMP, like I told you about yesterday, and then they find a crew roster inside the BMP in English, crew with American rank, American insignia. They showed pictures of them and their names that they showed. That was back in February, March. Okay. Joe Biden repeatedly said that American forces were not and will not get involved. No active duty people are over there. Okay. Allegedly, that right before February 22, all U.S. military advisors who had been in Ukraine, that entire Florida National Guard group of trainers from the Yavoriv base were in Ukraine, and that they were pulled out of the country. Since then, the U.S. has limited its military role to supplying weapons, intelligence, and training Ukrainian troops outside of Ukraine. But Russia claims the opposite, and so do all kinds of telegrammers. Okay, they allege that American soldiers or even entire units are on the ground and are taking casualties. And I don't know. It's I can't sit here and tell you that's the case, but I've seen plenty of stories about it, and all Western propaganda that you read on this says, "Oh, those stories are unfounded and are Russian disinformation." Right? Here's a March 2022 Tennessee Guardsman report. Pravda published an article claiming that 3 U.S. mercenaries that were identified as names of the Tennessee National Guard, Michael Hawker, Lieutenant Logan Shrum, and Lieutenant Cruz Toblin, were killed fighting in Donetsk. The report said that their personal belongings included a Tennessee state flag. The Tennessee National Guard said that all 3 individuals were alive and safe. 2 were still in Tennessee, they said. There were general rumors about, remember this one? U.S. Army Lieutenant General Roger Cloutier. He was then commander of NATO's Allied Land Command. This claim was on Telegram and some Iranian and Chinese outlets that said that a NATO general was directing Ukrainian troops. And they say that he was never in Ukraine and he was based in Turkey. Who knows? I know if they wanted to hide it, they could. There's regular reports on this. There's always stuff about Patriot missiles, right? Because you can't shoot Patriot missiles without American intelligence. And allegedly, you can't give another. I had a top secret clearance. You can't give a top secret clearance to somebody in another military. At least you couldn't back when I was serving in there. And I suppose the old Trumpster can give a top secret clearance to whoever he wants. But you can't target those. You can't target any of our missiles without having the proper clearance. So the Russian machine, media machine, propaganda machine, if you wish to call it that, says that you can't fire these things without American intelligence, and therefore somebody has to be there providing it, right? A Belarusian military expert called Alexander Alisin said that dozens of U.S. soldiers were killed in the strikes in Donetsk against Patriot batteries. And they also claimed, and I reported some of this, that a helicopter crash in America showed up at the same time, right? And that is used to justify it. And all I'm telling you is that it's possible, that is the case. That that because here's what he said. He said on March 9th they got rid of 2 Patriot systems, and the air crash was invented to hide the fact that U.S. military personnel died in combat in Ukraine. It happened in Texas on March 8th, the day before the destruction of the Patriot systems and National Gold. These soldiers died there. So people take whatever they can to find. I don't know whether it's true. It doesn't sound very likely to me, but it wouldn't surprise me if you're into conspiracy theories, right? So let's talk about then confirmed Western military presence, okay? That is backed up by stuff from the West, okay? While no U.S. combat units are officially deployed to Ukraine, some Western countries have military personnel in limited capacity. Leaked U.S. intelligence documents called the Discord leaks in April of 2023 revealed that 97 NATO Special Forces operators were in Ukraine. There were 50 British, 17 Latvian, 15 French, 14 American, and 1 Dutchman. These are fairly small numbers and likely involve training, liaison, or guarding Western embassies rather than frontline fighting. The White House acknowledged a small military presence in Ukraine, but said that it was for Marines guarding the U.S. Embassy and places in Kiev, not combat troops. Additionally, there are CIA personnel and Western intel agents that have operated. A report in the New York Times in 2022 suggested that scores of CIA officers were assisting Ukrainian intelligence. That means at least 40 or more agents on the ground. Other NATO countries have quietly embedded advisors as well. Britain and France have each sent a few dozen military experts to Ukraine. In fact, in 2023, the UK government confirmed a small number of British military personnel that were present in Ukraine to support weapons deliveries. Okay, France later, they had to give it up, had to give up the information because the German chancellor mentioned that British and French teams were in Ukraine coordinating advanced weapons like targeting of missile systems and stuff like that, which is why Germany didn't want to send its own personnel for similar tasks. Well, then France had to admit that they actually did have, and so did England, and they did admit it at that time. The presence of these Western forces and intelligence operatives is covert, but not a secret. Nobody has announced any casualties among their personnel, and allegedly none have been killed. There have been no public reports of any such losses, but there's plenty of reports on the Russian side, and then whenever they do it, they post something that happened in America too to hide their bodies. I would like to think that I served in the military. I'd like to think that we wouldn't be so callous toward a military member who was on active duty and died in another country by creating an accident for them that wasn't the actual accident in which they died. I hope that makes sense. But I would like to think that the U.S. Army wouldn't do that, or the U.S. military wouldn't do that. Okay. The Americans who died in Ukraine have overwhelmingly been volunteers or aid workers, not active duty troops. By mid 2023, 16 U.S. citizens had been confirmed killed in the war. All of them were civilians or former military serving in a volunteer capacity. These include people like Willie Cancel, a 22-year-old former Marine killed in 2022, Luke Lukeson and Brian Young killed in July 2022, and others from a variety of backgrounds. Each time an American is killed, the State Department confirms it and offers condolences and says that no U.S. forces are fighting. These individuals went on their own. In contrast, not one U.S. service member death has been announced in relation to Ukraine, and Pentagon hasn't listed any casualties because officially there are none. But this distinction is crucial. If an American soldier died in combat under Ukrainian orders, that would imply U.S. military involvement, which would be a major political event. So they couldn't admit it, even if it were true. The closest admission came from the leaked documents noting a handful of U.S. special forces that were in country. Even those are not supposed to be in direct combat. And again, nobody has ever said that any of them have been harmed. The Department of Defense for the United States has released no public document from 2014 to the present listing any American military casualties in Ukraine. Okay. Similarly, no NATO country has acknowledged combat deaths in Ukraine, with the exception of one Polish citizen who was reportedly working as a mercenary. The absence of such announcements aligns with the official Western government policies because they don't want to be seen as fighting for Ukraine. We are not involved. Remember, the political story, the talking point has always been this is Ukraine, right? There are cover-up theories and then reality. Frankly, I don't know which one is which, and I don't necessarily believe what the U.S. says or what any Western source says just because that's what they say. I don't believe things. There are ways to get information. People are very, I like a good sunshine request. You know what I mean? That would be nice to have. Is have a sunshine request and see if they'll provide any information. I doubt they'd provide it. I doubt they would answer it. But it'd be fun to make the request. Anywho, is what I think. So let's talk about these cover-up theories versus reality. So let's see. If you opine that military deaths have occurred but been covered up, like the helicopter crash that we talked about that might have been faked to hide casualties that occurred in Ukraine, as discussed, one theory in March 24 was Belarusian analysts claimed that 30 Americans were killed and they were all written off. And they found not enough bodies to cover this wartime story. Another instance, after a deadly Russian strike on the Ukrainian base in Yavoriv in March of 2022, Russian media speculated that foreign instructors, including Americans, might have been among the dozens killed that day. The Yavoriv attack did kill 35 people. Remember, I was telling you that Florida group was at the Yavoriv location. But it did kill 35 people and injure over 100. But all officially were Ukrainian or other foreign volunteers. The last U.S. trainers left that base on February 24, just before the invasion. U.S. officials said that no Americans were present, and some Russians said that they did. Okay. I'd always say that I look at a lot of Telegram, and I do. I watch some of the news from Telegram and where it comes from individual people. It says when you do a search for this that you should be careful with Telegram sources. They call Telegram disinformation. The Independent reported that Russians target the Tennessee Guards. Remember talking about the Tennessee Guardsmen? In other words, it was crafted to be a lie. Any any time Russia claims to find dog tags or documents of American servicemen, Western authorities have refuted it, like the one I was telling you about that had a list of American losses from a destroyed armored vehicle. But investigators noted inconsistency and said that no U.S. personnel were missing. Nobody will give you the truth if that was the truth, because that would show. But the Telegram thing looked pretty real to me. But so do robots these days. There's a lot of AI generated nonsense going on, right? One case that is sometimes cited by the Russians is a crash of a private airplane in July 2022 in Greece, which was carrying Serbian munitions to Bangladesh. Russian sources say it was actually carrying the bodies of dead NATO soldiers. This was allegedly debunked. The plane was a cargo aircraft, and the only fatalities were its Ukrainian crews. They also claim that Stanislav Krapivnik, who is mentioned in the Belarus fact check, he's an army soldier in the 90s who moved to Russia and in 2024 spread the claim of 30 NATO troops dying in the Patriot battery. But the Pentagon and official records, no Pentagon document shows any active duty U.S. military death in Ukraine from 2014 to the present. The only U.S. personnel deaths remotely linked to Ukraine were non-combat. In 2015, a Master Sergeant Joshua Wheeler, a Delta Force soldier, was killed in Iraq during a raid on a prison. That was announced even though it was a secret mission, and so they try to throw that out there to say that that means that they would, of course, tell about these sorts of activities if they had secret missions into Ukraine. Frankly, I don't believe that, but the close admission of boots on the ground was National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, who said in 2023 in April that a small U.S. presence in Ukraine was there performing oversight, and it was not an operational engagement. But I remember, and this was, when did she say she was there? It was post 2014 and before 2021. But after, JR would probably remember this from when I spoke to on the phone with somebody. She's a representative in Missouri, and she had gone to these bases in Ukraine and said that we had people there. Now, that is not after 2022. Allegedly, in 2022, we withdrew them all. But what about between 2014 and 2021? We were actively pumping to get Ukraine up to the 1 million man army that it had at the time of Russia taking its actions in February 2022. So whether or not people were left behind after that, I think it more likely than not. That's me. And I don't want to be accused of being a conspiracy theorist, but I also think that it's pretty likely that there were some active duty not frontline work, but plenty of stuff out there. Now, that's only let's see. That was most of that occurred, prior to 2014. I've got an entire list of plenty more to go through. I may have to stretch it to tomorrow, and it can be my last show of the week because I don't think I have, well, I know I don't have enough time to get into this. I have a couple more documents. I wanted to talk about illegal background for what happens to these people. Okay. When Russia, I've already told you that some Americans without dual nationality, I'm not talking about people who were citizens of Ukraine, came to America, married somebody, took a military route, did whatever, and got a U.S. passport that way. I'm not talking about those people. Plenty of those people have dual citizenship. Ukraine had a rule for a long time that said if you once you have a Ukrainian passport, it doesn't just, you're still a citizen. It doesn't matter if you go somewhere else. They want to use it for voting because people outside of the country are far more likely to like Zelensky, is the way I figure it. And so they, in fact, they reiterated this law a year or two ago and said that, dual passport holder, you're still subject to the draft. You're still subject to, punishment. You can still have your property seized, whatever, inside of Ukraine. And but when I'm looking at these numbers, I'm specifically out there looking for American citizens or Western citizens without connections prior or by marriage or however, and certainly not with a Ukrainian passport. So I'm probably going to continue on this topic tomorrow. But the U.S. government's public stance has always been to strongly discourage Americans from participating in this war. Publicly. Privately, these are patriots. This is patriotism. We're fighting for democracy. Remember Biden telling us we're fighting for democracy in Ukraine? There is no democracy in Ukraine. So American officials warn volunteers they could face legal and national security issues, right? So, and this is a lead up. This is a long freaking story to get you to the legal points of this. But in particular, there's something called the Neutrality Act, which is 18 U.S.C. 960. It prohibits organizing a military expedition against a nation at peace with the U.S. Okay? Russia's at peace with the U.S. Ukraine is at peace with the U.S. No war has been declared against anybody. So a citizen going over and fighting on either side is probably, or at least potentially, breaking the law. And I wanted to find whether or not anybody has been subject to this, especially in Ukraine. Okay? They've sure threatened it against some Russian guys, people who went to Russia. They've lost their American passports, all kinds of stuff. And I want to get further into that, but it's kind of a long story, right? I've been researching it for a while. I'm probably obsessed, but that's okay. But the Neutrality Act prohibits organizing a military expedition against a nation at peace. So either side, you could go after them. But this law has rarely been enforced, and no American volunteers in Ukraine have been prosecuted under it to date. The law also provides that joining a foreign nation's military would jeopardize U.S. citizenship if it's done with intent to renounce allegiance, especially if that foreign military is fighting the United States. In practice, because the U.S. has not declared war on Russia, this provision has not been tested in court for any volunteers in this conflict. But U.S. officials have floated the possibility that under some circumstances, Americans could face criminal penalties or risk losing their citizenship by taking part in an overseas conflict. But they only single out the Russian people for harsh treatment, not Ukrainian. So who are we at war with? I don't know, but that's the end of my program. We're going to wrap it up for tonight. Please join me tomorrow because I'm going to continue right here where we left off and continue on this topic. My name is Samuel Trapp, and this is International Flavor on damradio.com/live. You can listen to me every night damradio.com/live, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Missouri time, Chicago time, Central Standard Time. You can always go out and get my podcasts at internationalflavor.com. And there's plenty of variety out there. And I very much appreciate you listening to the program. Tune in again tomorrow night for the week final. I look forward to having you on the show. Each of you have a very good night.